In Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare famously wrote, "What's in a name?" And if he was sitting here today and he asked me, "Sir Charles, what's in a name?" I'd turn to him and say, "A whole lot, homeboy," because semantics are powerful, and our psychology, experience, motivation, and behavior are affected by the words we use and the meaning we ascribe to those words. I have to give my grandpa credit for my interest in semantics. And if you ever spent any time with my grandfather, then you likely ended up in some philosophical back and forth about the meaning of words. As an example, once I was visiting him, when he retired, he moved to a small country town about an hour north of New Orleans, Folsom, Louisiana. And he and I were outside walking around the pond. It was a beautiful day. And I looked up into the sky and I said, "Wow, Grandpa, the sky is so blue today." And he looked back at me and he said, "Is the sky blue?" And I looked at him and I'm like, "Are we looking at the same sky?" I'm like, "Yeah, it looks blue to me." And then he pointed and he said, "Well, I see something that looks white." And I said, "Well, that's a cloud, Grandpa." And then he asked, "Is a cloud part of the sky?" And so that gives you a little bit of an idea about the types of conversations I had with my grandfather. And I know that at times me and my cousins got frustrated by him parsing our words and asking us all these philosophical questions. But looking back, I think what he was trying to do was help us to develop clarity in our communication and clarity in our thinking. And now that I'm a health and wellness coach and I'm a helping professional that's working with people, I feel that clarity of thinking is one of the key things in understanding our psychology and then helping us to navigate behavior change and motivation. Now, I've made this point before about the connection between thinking and behavior and motivation, but I'll kind of restate it here. From a thinking perspective, our mindset and our resultant motivation is a product of what we focus on and the story we tell about what we focus on. Now, this is such a key point when it comes to mental well-being and experience and motivation. Things are neutral in nature, but they take on a positive or a negative connotation based on the story we tell, based on the meaning we ascribe to them. And if we ascribe a positive meaning to something, we're more likely to be drawn to it and value it. But if we ascribe a negative meaning to something, we're more likely to be avoidant of it. So words have power over our thinking and behavior through the meaning we ascribe to them and to the story we tell about them. As an example, when I say the word diet, what meaning do you ascribe to that word? What story do you tell about the word diet? If we look at the etymology of diet, it actually means a way of life or a pattern of eating or habits. And so some people will ascribe a positive meaning to the word diet and they'll think, "Oh, well, I have a healthy diet. I have a healthy lifestyle. This is my way of living." And when we ascribe a positive meaning to something, it's more likely that we value it and that we will pursue things that are in the arena of that word. But if we ascribe a meaning to diet that it's restrictive and we can't eat what we like and we're going to be miserable and hungry, then we're going to be more likely to avoid things around the concept and idea of diet. Now, again, you can ascribe whatever meaning you want to any words. I'm not saying that one is right or wrong. I just simply want to make the point that when we give a positive meaning to a word, it is more likely going to draw us in that direction. And when we give a negative meaning to a word, it is more likely going to cause us to avoid. Now, one of the frustrating things about communication in general is that people use the same words to mean different things. And it's just part of the beauty of language and the beauty of life. And so I'm not expecting that, we're all going to always agree on exactly what every word should mean, because we all have our own individual experiences. But when we are trying to learn something, it can be super frustrating when people use different words to mean the same thing. And I know that this happens in health a lot. One professional uses a word in health and wellness, and you're like, oh, that makes sense. Then another person uses the same word, but they mean something a little bit different. And then a third person uses the same word, and you're like, I can't get it. Everyone's saying different things. And so sometimes as a coach, that's where I can help people, because I tend to read so much about health and fitness that sometimes I can help, make some meaning in the chaos of the confusion. But there are three words that we use a lot in health, fitness, and wellness that I think tend to add to confusion and a lot of psychological angst. And those words are good, bad, and best. And I know you may have already thought about some other words that you could throw into the mix. But first, good and bad are judgment words, they're evaluations, they're opinions. Now, often when we hear good and bad, we want to ascribe fact and truth to those words, but the words good and bad are opinions. And this is something that's interesting, I think, about our own personal psychology. And I've seen a lot of people do this when they work with me as a coach. When we ascribe the word good or bad to a behavior, to our ability, to our efforts, it influences our psychology. As an example, if you read on some website that from some super duper athlete that an hour of exercise is the minimum, you have to do an hour. If you do less than an hour, it's not good. Now, again, if that is what you hear, okay, less than an hour is not good, then you will start to only value an hour or more of exercise. But what if in your day, you can only fit 10 minutes of working out in? Oh, well, but 10 minutes isn't good. Only an hour is good. And so that description starts to affect how you interact around the word exercise. And we could go on and on about this, good or bad. When we do something and we deem it to be good, it tends to reinforce us in a positive way. And when we do something that we deem to be bad or not good enough, it tends to reinforce us in a negative way. And so sometimes we demotivate ourselves just by the way we classify our behaviors or our experience. All right, since I'm talking about this, I'll make this point for you. When it comes to our behaviors and labeling them as good or bad, what I would say is that any honest effort that you give to nurture your body, to fuel yourself, to pursue or engage in any wellness activity should count. So if we get in the mindset, if the story we tell is that everything counts, then that reframes our efforts. Now, 10 minutes is good if everything counts. And 20 minutes is good if everything counts. And 60 minutes is good if everything counts. And so again, I know that I digress a little bit about this good and bad, but the main point is that the words we use and the meaning we ascribe to those words affects our psychology, and then it affects our behavior as well. Just really quickly about the word best, because it's pervasive in our culture. We live in a hyper marketing culture anyway, and so we slap best on everything. Best car, best phone, best dog, best this, best that, best diet plan, best exercise plan. And it can be crazy to sort through it all. But just know that the word best is a descriptor and it's vague. It doesn't necessarily mean anything in particular. And so when we are thinking to ourselves, I want to do the best, what we first need to do is, what do we mean by best? What do we value? Because what we value will determine what is best. As an example, if you sit in front of me and you say, Charles, I'm considering doing a 5K with all the people in my community. What's the best way to get me ready for it? Well, I'm going to say, you know what? The best way is probably to start running, walking, run walking, because that makes sense. That's what you want to do. But if you ask me a different question, Charles, I want to, live a long, healthy life. What's the best cardiovascular exercise that I should do? I would say the one that you'll stick with, because I could say running is the best, but if you hate running and you'll never do it, then how can that be best for you? And so again, the word best takes on two different meanings in just those two different scenarios. And let's add a third scenario. Let's say that you just had knee surgery or foot surgery. And you say to me, Charles, I just had surgery. What's the best cardiovascular exercise for me? In that situation, the answer might be completely different. It might be something that's non-weight bearing, like swimming or biking. And so again, we use this term best a lot, but it's a vague term. And so when I think about my grandfather and how he parsed us so much on words and questioned us on semantics, best is one of those words that I feel always needs a little bit of scrutiny. And so let's just wrap up this conversation about semantics. Now, the words we use and the meaning we ascribe to those words have an effect on our psychology, our experience, our motivation, and our behavior. Generally speaking, when we ascribe a positive meaning to something, we will tend to be drawn to it. And so our motivation will be enhanced when we are using words where we have ascribed a positive meaning. And if we ascribe a negative meaning to a word or to a situation, then we'll generally want to avoid it. And so we can use our thinking in a couple ways. We can try to reframe the meaning we give to something negative so that it doesn't impede our motivation to pursue it. Or we can use words that we already associate in a positive light. And when we are focusing on what we are drawn to, what our values are, what our interests are, when we're using those words and we're incorporating those ideas in our plan, then we'll generally be more motivated to follow through with the plan. Okay, I hope that was good food for thought. And I'm going to talk a lot more about semantics because, again, there's so many words that we can use that sometimes trip us up mentally. But before I go, as always, I just want to ask you this question. Has there been some word that you associated a negative meaning with? And because of that negative association, it was hard for you to engage in those activities. But then you made a reframe of how you looked at that word. And when you reframed the meaning you gave to that word, it started changing your behavior around that context. Things that make you go, I know. All right, so that's all I want to say for now. Remember that semantics is powerful. You can ascribe any meaning you want, but remember that the meaning you give to words or situations has an effect on both your psychology and your behavior. Until next time, be well.